Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Today I'm introducing federal legislation to make 21 the new minimum age for purchasing any tobacco product anywhere in the United States. Let me say that again. A new age nationwide for purchasing anything classified as a tobacco product. Cigarettes, e-cigarettes, vapor products, and everything else. It shouldn't be 18 any longer. It should be 21. And this legislation will make that happen. Now, I recognize I might seem like an unusual candidate to lead this charge. I'm the senior senator from Kentucky. I've consistently stood up for our Kentucky farmers, including our tobacco farmers. I championed the tobacco buyout back in 2004. But actually, my long experience with this subject and my commitment to farm families are part of what's convinced me that now is the right time to do this. So I'd like to say a few words about why. Mr. President, tobacco has been deeply intertwined in our nation's history from the very beginning. Native Americans grew it and used it before European explorers ever arrived. John Rolfe, the famous settler who later married Pocahontas, kick-started Virginia's export economy using foreign tobacco seeds in 1612. By the eve of the Revolution, tobacco was a major export and a huge part of our colony's prosperity. Many tobacco farmers were energetic early backers of independence. George Washington grew tobacco at Mount Vernon, at first as his primary crop. In Benjamin Franklin's newspapers, some of the earliest ads for American tobacco ran right alongside the essays urging Americans to stand up for freedom. Several million pounds of tobacco were actually used as collateral to help secure the loans they needed from France. Years later, Lewis and Clark used it as a peace offering to native tribes they met while they were headed west. And like too many other parts of early American history, tobacco's development was closely linked with the sin of slavery. So tobacco has been a part of this country right from the start. So much so, in fact, that right here in the U.S. Capitol, artisans replaced the traditional designs in many of the Roman-style columns and chiseled American tobacco leaves in their place. Right here in this chamber, we still have some old spittoons. We used to have Senate snuff boxes filled on the taxpayer's dime. And the residue on the floors used to be so considerable that Charles Dickens warned fellow visitors not to pick up anything they dropped unless they had a pair of gloves on. One of the senators that Dickens actually admired most from that visit was Henry Clay. And befitting the Commonwealth of Kentucky and our own rich history with the crop, that legendary Kentuckian was also a legendary tobacco enthusiast. When the first settlers came over the Appalachians into what is now Kentucky, tobacco offered the perfect opportunity to jumpstart their new lives. A pocket full of seeds was enough for a down payment on a new, economically secure future for your family. Kentucky had fertile soil. We had favorable summers. We had inland waterways and access to the Mississippi for shipping. Before long, burley tobacco was a stable crop for literally tens of thousands of Kentucky farms. For a time, we led even Virginia and North Carolina as the #1 tobacco state. Generations of farmers, even if they weren't primarily tobacco growers, would plant a little corner of it to help float the rest of the operation. Farming tobacco put shoes on kids' feet. It put dinner on the table. For many in Kentucky, tobacco made the American dream possible. It's a central pillar of our state history. In fact, back in the early 1900s, there was literally an armed conflict called the Black Patch War that revolved around tobacco prices, farmers against farmers. We're talking about beatings, horsewhippings, barns were burned. Eventually, martial law was declared in part of Kentucky. We're talking about neighbor-on-neighbor violence that was reminiscent of the Civil War, all, Mr. President, over tobacco prices. The conflict was actually memorialized in the book Night Rider, the first novel by Robert Penn Warren, the famous Kentucky-born writer who won multiple Pulitzers and served as U.S. Poet Laureate. A few decades later, in the late 1930s, Senator Alvin Barkley, the only other Kentuckian to serve as majority leader, set up a top-down quota system that got Washington heavily involved in the tobacco market to try and provide price special assurance for farmers. So when I first arrived here in the Senate in 1985, more than 2/3 of Kentucky's farmers grew some tobacco, and it accounted for almost half of the value of all the agricultural production in my state. But of course, Mr. President, demand for U.S. tobacco has gone down as, among other factors, our knowledge of the health consequences has gone up. Even as early as the late 1800s, when the transition began from all the varied forms of tobacco toward the modern mass-marketed, mass-produced cigarette industry, there was concern. Those concerns went mainstream with the Surgeon General's report on smoking in the 1960s. And of course, our understanding has only grown with more research. By 2004, these concerns plus foreign competition were making that quota system less of a helpful backstop and more of a stranglehold. So there was an interest on all sides in unwinding this archaic system without pulling the rug out from under our growers. I secured the Fair and Equitable Tobacco Reform Act, known as the Tobacco Buyout, which President Bush 43 signed into law. It wound down the special treatment for tobacco while also providing the farmers who had invested heavily in these quotas 10 years of buyout payments to ease their transition. And Mr. President, what's happened since then has been a really exciting story. Just as Kentucky farmers once led the nation in cultivating tobacco and helped write that important chapter in American history, they're now helping write the next chapter of innovation. We aren't interested in banning tobacco. We aren't interested in turning our backs on adults who choose to use these products or pretending we aren't proud of the Kentuckians who still grow it. But as the market has settled, many of our farmers have seized the opportunity to try new things. Just a few years before the buyout, almost 30,000 Kentucky farms were still growing tobacco. It still made up about 1/4 of all of our farmers' cash receipts statewide. But the 10-year buyout program ended in 2014. These days, instead of 30,000 farms growing tobacco in the Commonwealth, it's more like 2,600. It still brings in hundreds of millions of dollars, but now it's only 6% of our total receipts from agriculture. Freed from the sunk cost of a quota system, our farmers have been able to participate in a more free market and reap the benefits. In fact, overall cash receipts from agriculture actually set a new record in 2014, the very same year the buyout ended. So I'm proud of the 2004 policy I achieved. It has been a success. Kentucky farmers have taken the ball, however, and they've run with it. I mentioned that George Washington initially planted a whole lot of tobacco at Mount Vernon, but before a variety of factors led him to scale it back and experiment with other things. One of those new crops was hemp. That was all the way back in the 1770s. Well, as usual, George Washington knew what he was doing. Industrial hemp is making a comeback today, and Kentucky farmers asked for help to change the outdated federal laws that confused the plant with cannabis and prevented them from exploring the crop. In 2014, I fought and won for farmers the right to explore hemp through state pilot projects. And in last year's Farm Bill, my provision finished the job and made hemp a fully legal commodity nationwide. And now we're seeing the future take shape right before our eyes. Farmers in 99 of 120 counties are growing hemp. Processors are reporting more than $50 million in gross sales. And this is just one of the new crops our farmers are using to chart new directions in and connect Kentucky's past with its future. I realize this has been quite a history lesson, Mr. President, but Kentuckians are used to hearing sweeping statements about our tobacco industry from folks outside the state who know none of this history and yet have no problem forming strong opinions. We're proud of our past, we're proud of who we are, but Kentucky farmers don't want their children to get hooked on tobacco products while they're in middle school or high school any more than any parents anywhere want that to happen. Kentucky's proud of what we make, but we also take pride in the health and development of our children. And the sad reality is that Kentucky has been the home to the highest rates of cancer in the country. We lead the entire nation in the percentage of cancer cases tied directly to smoking. Our state once grew tobacco like none other, and now we're being hit by the health consequences of tobacco use like none other. And nationwide, we're in the middle of a completely new public health epidemic that is really threatening our progress in youth tobacco use, the use of e-cigarettes and vaping. This spike has been concentrated in teenagers and not just 18-year-olds. Moms and dads across the country have seen their middle and high schoolers take up this new habit and start down a deadly path that our society has previously spent decades working hard to close down. From 2017 to 2018, high school students' use of what are classified as tobacco products shot up by nearly 40%. That's a staggering figure, especially in a single year. And that increase is driven almost entirely by vaping. The brain is still developing at this young age. When teenagers use tobacco, they're quite literally altering their brain's chemistry and making it more susceptible to addiction. Many young vape users aren't buying the product themselves, but sharing them with a friend. And remember, 90% of adult daily smokers say they used their first tobacco product before age 19. Youth vaping is a public health crisis. It's our responsibility as parents and public servants to do everything we can to keep these harmful products out of high schools and out of youth culture. We need to put the national age of purchase at 21. That's why I'm introducing this legislation in recognition of tobacco's storied past in Kentucky and aware of the threat that all tobacco products pose now and for future generations. I'm proud to partner on this effort with Senator Tim Kaine, who represents another Commonwealth with a long history of growing tobacco. And I know there's interest from members on both sides of the aisle, including Senators Young, Romney, Schatz, and others. This is not a zero-sum choice between farmers and public health. We can support both. We need to support both. But the health of our children is literally at stake. That is why I will make enacting this legislation one of my highest priorities, and I look forward to working with all of our colleagues to make that happen.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, I rise to support the words of my colleague, Leader McConnell, and to thank him for working on this important piece of legislation, the Tobacco-Free Youth Act. I'd like to offer some thoughts about why I've been happy to work with Leader McConnell and with other senators who share the goal of raising the national tobacco age to 21. Like Senator McConnell, I come from a tobacco state. The Jamestown-based Virginia company was chartered by King James, landing at Jamestown in 1607, beginning the English colonization of the United States, and they almost didn't make it. They could easily have failed like other English settlements in the Outer Banks of North Carolina or others, but two things saved them. The first was the magnanimity of the Powhatan Indians that in those early years when times were tough, helped them survive, helped them get over times of drought and hunger. And the second thing was the discovery of, as Leader McConnell mentioned, the tobacco seeds in Virginia that through the efforts of John Rolfe and others became such a powerful driver of the Virginia agricultural economy. Had it not been for tobacco, had it not been for the Powhatan Indians, that Jamestown colony would likely have disappeared. Tobacco has such a place in our history that in the ceiling of both of the legislative chambers in the Virginia Capitol, designed by Thomas Jefferson, the ceiling is circled by gold-embossed tobacco leaves. We restored the Capitol in 2000 and restored the gold embossing because we understand that it was tobacco that helped create modern Virginia. In the city of Richmond, where I live and where I served as mayor, one of the largest cigarette-producing machines, factories in the world exist, the Philip Morris Altria plant in South Richmond, that over decades has been a fantastic employer of local Virginians, local residents. I was proud as governor to work on tobacco initiatives because, as the leader indicates, as we become more aware of public health consequences, there's been more need to try to stem the challenges that these health consequences create. As I was governor, I worked in tandem with my Republican Speaker of the House to ban smoking in restaurants and bars, which was a tough sell at the time back in 2009, but we made it happen. But probably my happiest day as governor vis-a-vis tobacco was the day where I went to Chesterfield County in suburban Richmond, and together with bipartisan legislators, we celebrated results that had just come out that showed for the first time in recorded history the youth smoking rate in Virginia was below the national average. Much like Kentucky, we had been above the national average because in a state where it's a product you're proud of, everyone's encouraged to use it. But by about 2009, we were below the national average, and we felt very good about that. So I'm here partly with Senator McConnell because of our history, but really I'm here, as he indicated, because of the current challenge. We're backsliding. We're backsliding. The recent increases in youth tobacco use demonstrate we need to do more. Current youth tobacco product use increased dramatically from 2017 to 2018, completely erasing the decline in tobacco product use among young that had been happening for many years. From the CDC, this increase is driven largely by e-cigarettes. More than 1 in 4 high schoolers in 2018, 1 in 14 middle schoolers in 2018 had used a tobacco product in the last 30 days, a dramatic increase from 2017. 1.5 million more young people used e-cigarettes in 2018 than in 2017. E-cigarettes are the most commonly used product among the young, and they're frequently used in combination with other tobacco products. And the recent increase in youth use of tobacco products is heavily driven by the popularity of e-cigarettes, shaped like a flash drive, able to be shared with friends, sold in kid-friendly flavors with a high nicotine content. Disturbingly, it's not only e-cigarettes. Use of any tobacco product grew by more than 38% among high schoolers from 2017 to 2018. And in Virginia, where we had celebrated becoming a state that was now below the national average, we're seeing dramatic increases. 16.3% of high school youth are now reporting using any tobacco product. 6.5% of those, a third of those, smoke cigarettes. According to the CDC, any use of tobacco product by young is considered unsafe. The leader laid out the use of e-cigarettes starts to alter the chemistry of the brain and actually make a young person more prone for the rest of their life to becoming addicted. And it's not just addiction, it's also learning, memory, attention, impulse control, cognition. The use of tobacco also increases among the young the likelihood of developing mood disorders like anxiety and depression. So there's a strong rationale for this bill, and I was honored when the Majority Leader asked about a month ago if I would work together with him on a bipartisan bill as 2 senators from tobacco states, joining others to find a way to raise the age from 18 to 21. 95% of adult smokers begin smoking before the age of 21. And the Institute of Medicine did research recently, now the National Academy of Medicine, showing that increasing the tobacco age to 21 will, over time, significantly reduce the number of young and young adult smoking, as well as smoking-caused deaths, improving public health and saving lives. What does our bill do? Our bill raises the federal minimum age to purchase any tobacco products from 18 to 21. We direct the FDA to update their current regulations and enforcement structure for the current 18 age minimum and apply to the new 21 age minimum. We encourage states to pass their own laws raising the age to 21 and require the states enforce those laws and meet other requirements as they currently do pursuant to the Sinar Amendment. Our legislation would apply to all populations, to all types of tobacco products, including e-cigarettes. And as a father of a Marine and as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I feel strongly we should extend the same public health protections to members of the military as we do to their civilian counterparts. So I look forward to working with the Majority Leader and so many others on both sides of the aisle to do a good thing for public health, to do a good thing for our young people, and raise the tobacco age to 21. As the leader mentioned, there are other Senators Romney and Young, Senator Schatz and Durbin, Senator Murray, who have invested their energies in this effort. We pledge to work together with all of them. We can come together to do this on behalf of our young people. And with that, Mr. President, I thank you for the time. Thank you to the Majority Leader, and I yield the floor.